TWRS-190. Check, check. By TWRS-190.
It's the Two-Way Radio Show.
And welcome to the Two-Way Radio Show. I'm Rick Savoya.
And I'm Danny Feemster.
And this is the podcast about two-way radios for business and consumer communications. Today we'll discuss the pros and cons of both the amateur and GMRS radio services and which one we think is better. We'll also take some of your comments and questions from our blog and our forum at twowayradioforum.com. Our show is sponsored by TwoWayRadios.com, the source of two-way radios and radio accessories for businesses and consumers since 2002. TwoWayRadios.com, your radio specialists. Recently, someone in our forum introduced a discussion comparing the amateur radio service to the GMRS and provided a short but interesting take as to why he thought ham radio was the better option. The reasoning put forth was based simply on the fact that while both were governed by rules set forth by the FCC, ham radio had more spectrum allocated to it than GMRS. While it is true that GMRS has fewer channels, is it really fair to say that ham radio is better than GMRS? Or could it be the other way around?
Rick, this is 3 episodes in a row where you picked a controversial topic. I don't think we're going to get out of this unscathed.
Well, probably not.
Which is better, GMRS or ham? Goodness, that's a monster.
Well, I did write an article on our blog.
Yes, you did.
And
it got quite a few comments, as I recall.
Yes, it did. Yes, it did.
Some users didn't like your article, but
some did, and some didn't.
I liked it. I thought it was good.
I thought so too. That's when I wrote it.
Well, maybe we'll agree today on the answer to this.
Could be. Could be.
Which is better? Well, the user on the forum, I think, is correct in one way. Ham is a much more powerful service than GMRS. I mean, I'll just right out of the gate, I don't think there's any questioning that has so many more capabilities, so much more spectrum. I mean, you can talk to people all around the world. You can use it's a hobby basically. So you can build your own radio. You have so much power with ham. There's tons of things you can do. Morse code, so many things. We talk to hams every day. We love hams, and maybe they get a little touchy on this, but
well,
GMRS has some advantages too.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
It's not a clear-cut answer as to which is better. It's like saying which is better, a fork or a spoon.
Mm-hmm. Well, it depends on what your needs are, really.
If you want to talk to other hams, ham is clearly the best choice. Or if you want to start a new hobby, ham is great. If I want to talk to my wife in the backyard, ham is terrible because she doesn't have a license and she's not going to take the test to get a license. So GMRS is the only option there.
Well, let's do a little quick comparison between these two services, and then we'll sort of figure out which one is better, or if either of them are better than the other. I mean, first of all, they both have to follow the same rules. They're both of these services are governed and regulated by the FCC. And, that's, I mean, you can't get away from that.
The rules are different. It's not the same rules. They have different rules for each service.
Yeah. GMRS it comes under Part 95E, and amateur radio comes under Part 97. So they do have different rules, but they're both regulated by the FCC. And both of these services require a license to transmit. It's not like one is license free and the other one's not. They both need the license. And they each are issued a call sign. As of 2022, the license for both of these services, the cost is the same. It's $35. And they're both valid for the same period of time, 10 years. So, when you're looking at a comparison between those services from the FCC, there really is not much of a difference there. They both have to have a license. You both have to have a call sign. You have to pay the same amount of money, and it's valid for the same period of time. So, really,
those are some similarities.
They're both the same.
Those are similarities, but the fact that you have to have a call sign is such a small part of the overall service.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the licenses themselves are definitely different. There are some important differences in the licenses. But, let's touch on those for just a minute. I mean, first of all, GMRS, fairly simple service. You plunk down your $35 and you get a license. You really don't have to know anything about radios. You can go in there completely without any knowledge of radios at all and just pay a license, and you've got your license, and you can go out and buy your radios and use them to your heart's content, pretty much. So you really don't have...
It's like a fishing license. There's no screening process. Yeah. If you can figure out the FCC's website, which is not simple.
No, it's not.
Then you can get a GMRS license.
However, fortunately, we do have an article on our website at by2wayradios.com and our blog that shows how to get a GMRS license in only 4 steps. They're not necessarily simple steps, but they're 4 steps, and it walks you through the entire process. So if you're looking to get a GMRS license and you're really confused by the FCC website, you can just go to our website and we'll walk you through it, and easy peasy. And it's done. Well, I don't know if it's easy. That's a relative term. Some people find it fairly simple, some not. The FCC definitely doesn't make it simple, but we try to simplify it.
So anyway, ham also requires a license, but the license process is much more complicated on the ham side of things because you have to take a test. That's the big barrier to entry for ham. I think that having to take a test, study for the test, there's technical information on the test. So it takes some effort. You have to kind of prepare yourself that you're going to enter this new hobby. It takes learning and studying to pass the test. Now, they give you all the questions. There's a possibility of 300 questions, and the test is going to have 30 of those questions. So it's really anyone can do it. It just takes some effort.
Well, that's on the technician side. There are 3 different. I mean, that's the other thing. There are 3 different tiers of licenses for ham radio. You've got the technician, which is fairly easy to do. You can a couple of weeks of studying, you can pass the test, and you have the general class, and that gives you more access to more frequencies and more. It gives you access to more of what ham has to offer. And then you have the amateur extra, which is a little bit more intense. Well, I say it's fairly
a 500. I could be dating myself. They may have changed it. I think it's a 500 person question pool or 500 question pool with maybe 50 questions on the test. The extra, it is a more complicated question,
but it's a little bit more complicated. It's more involved. It requires, I think, you have to have a little knowledge of math and things like that. I'm terrible at.
The important thing is, I think, even the technician level. If you just take the first test and get your technician license, then the abilities that you're granted with the technician license, even those capabilities are greater than what you get with GMRS. If you're just looking at it on paper, the capabilities that you get with a technician ham license is more than GMRS because you get more bands. You get the UHF for 70 centimeter band, which is where GMRS is, but you also get 2 meter, you get 1.25 meter. I think you can transmit on 10 meter frequencies, more capabilities right out of the gate.
Yeah. Well, you've got all those multiple bands on ham radio.
And there are more repeaters. There's more ham repeaters in those frequency ranges than there are GMRS repeaters. So ham is a, more popular service. There's more people on it. There's more repeaters. There's more equipment.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're interested in the hobby and you like talking to other hams, ham is definitely the way to go.
Right. It will definitely.
And I would say ham is better for those people.
Well, for some people, yeah. But the services also have different freedoms and limitations too.
Of course.
And with that, and you already mentioned the fact that it opens up, ham radio opens up more bands and frequencies than GMRS. I mean, you are limited to just those 30 GMRS channels, the 22 simplex and 8 repeater channels. There are some other things here about the ham radio hobby. First of all, it's a hobby service. Definitely the FCC recognizes it as a hobby service, and that's what it is. And GMRS is not a hobby service, although a lot of there are folks that have pretty much gone into it considering it a hobby. The FCC recognizes it as a utility service, and it's for everybody. And there are some hams that have gotten their GMRS license because they see the advantages of using GMRS in some scenarios and situations that they say, hey, this is like ham radio light. And it wasn't intended to be ham radio light. That's not what the FCC intended it for, but it's more and more it's becoming used for. Now, I'm not knocking that per se, but I do have some thoughts on it. I'll see if we can bring that up in a little bit. But having said that, I mean, definitely there are some advantages to ham over GMRS in respect to the frequencies and things like that, but it also has an advantage in terms of what you can do with the equipment, because that ham license gives you the ability to pretty much, it's for experimentation. It's designed for hobbyists and for experimentation. And a lot of that has to do with being able to develop new technologies and new processes and things like that can benefit society as a whole. And because of that, ham radios are not under the scrutiny of the FCC in terms of having to have Part 97 type acceptance like GMRS does. GMRS radios, they have to be Part 95 type accepted for legal use. And you have to use, you're supposed to use, let's say that, a type accepted, approved Part 95 radio that's approved for GMRS. And with ham, you don't have that limitation. You can pretty much pick up a business radio, or you can pick up any other kind of radio that you want to mess around with. And if it supports ham frequencies, you can turn that basically into a ham radio. And that's my understanding of it. But that's why, that's where all the tinkering comes from with the hobby. And you can do some pretty interesting things with all of that. So you don't have that same scrutiny, and you have that greater freedom. So that is definitely.
I agree with you that on GMRS, it seems like there are some hobbyists with GMRS. We talk to them pretty frequently by two-way radios. And I think that just kind of comes along with when you get into something like GMRS and you want to expand your knowledge. You want to put up a repeater. Most of the time, these people are getting into GMRS because it fills a need. They need radio. They need to talk to someone, and GMRS is the solution to that problem. They're not really getting into it because they want something else to do, like a hobby, for example. And with ham, it's the opposite. You're right.
Yeah. Well, now, GMRS also does have its advantages, and going back to the licensing for a minute, because I don't think we really covered it too much, but that ham license is just for an individual. You can't share it with anybody else. That's for you. That's your call sign, and you're responsible for that license.
One thing we probably should mention, because I'm sure we're going to get comments if we don't, is with the ham license, you are allowed to let other people use your ham license, your call sign, as long as you're supervising.
Right.
I believe there are some provisions for that, although it's not as extensive as what you get with a GMRS license. I mean, with GMRS, your entire family, including in-laws, extended family, nieces, nephews, if you get a GMRS license, basically everyone you're related to, cousins, can use that call sign and communicate on radio. So it's $35 for your entire family.
Which gives you a lot of latitude for a GMRS license. It really does. We mentioned before that ham operators can transmit on a lot of different bands and frequencies. GMRS is limited to the 22 assigned channels and the 8 pre-assigned repeater channels. One thing that I don't think we really touched on too much, because we did mention that ham operators could operate all around the world, essentially. Ham operators can also bounce those signals around to increase the coverage across hundreds or even thousands of miles. So you have even greater freedom of range than GMRS. And that is, I think, a very important advantage for ham. And that's one that has been, that a lot of people in the comments on the article brought up. And they said, well, this automatically just makes ham radio better than GMRS. But GMRS has a couple of other advantages here too.
Yeah, let's go through some of the advantages of GMRS over ham. And repeaters is one where it's an interesting topic, but I think it puts it on level playing field somewhat with ham, because repeaters are the way GMRS users can get out over distance. With a GMRS radio, you can find a local repeater, and with a handheld radio or a mobile radio in your vehicle, you can talk to the repeater and then essentially expand your range to typically maybe 50 miles, 100 miles, depending on terrain and how the repeater is set up. So this is long distance, but still local communication. You're not going to get the thousands of miles that you could get with ham, but the barrier to entry is much, much lower. Like the fact that you can talk to your family and your friends just by giving them a radio, and there's not really this barrier to entry, which is the ham test, to be able to communicate with them. That is huge, but it's still a very capable service because of the repeater abilities and the high power that GMRS allows, up to 50 watts on channels 15 through 22 and the repeater channels. You can go up to 50 watts on GMRS, which will get you significant range. Some examples of how GMRS is used is where you might think of how CB is used or was used, like off-roaders. Overlanding is a big group that GMRS has just taken over here recently, sort of replacing CB radio. And CB is more limited in, if you have a 4-watt CB radio in your vehicle, you can talk to other vehicles that are within a few miles of where you are. In a best case, with GMRS repeaters, you have much more range.
There's one other advantage when it comes to the repeaters, I think, that the GMRS service has that the ham service really doesn't. Well, actually, there are a couple, but I'm going to mention one here, is that with a ham repeater, you set up a ham repeater, and that station has to give out a call sign every so often. It has to give out an ID, repeater ID, every so often. Now, GMRS has that as well, but there is a caveat. If it's an open repeater or a private repeater used by a club or a group or something, then yeah, they have, the repeater has to give out a periodic ID, repeater ID. However, if it is used just within, if it's a private repeater used just within the same family, that sort of thing, like on a family farm or what have you, that's not required, because everyone who gets on the repeater is using the same call sign for the same station. They're basically broadcasting, or they're basically transmitting the repeater ID, because that is the ID. That's the call sign that the family's using. That's their own call sign.
Sure.
So,
Now, let's be clear. They would be transmitting the call sign verbally every 15 minutes, as is required by GMRS anyway. So they would just be speaking their call sign as they're using the repeater, instead of it needing to be automated.
Right. And that's if it's for private use by a license holder and their family. There's another advantage here that I think we'll bring up here shortly, but I do want to touch on the power limits, because we were talking about that before. Let's get a little bit more specific about some of the power limits that each service has. You did mention it for GMRS already, but let's talk about what ham offers. I mean, it's no secret that ham radio has an edge when it comes to the transmit power, but it kind of depends on what license you have. The technicians can transmit on up to 1,500 watts PEP on most of the VHF and UHF bands, but they're limited to 200 watts PEP on the HF bands. But when you get to the general and the extra class licenses, they give you a lot more latitude than that. And particularly, you can get up to 1,500 watts PEP on most bands, not just the VHF and UHF bands, but most of the bands, with a few restrictions on some of the additional bands that they can access. But for the most part, that's a lot of wattage.
That's far more capable than GMRS as far as power goes. Although that type of wattage is much more beneficial with the lower frequencies, like the HF frequencies, as they're going to call them, because that's what you would use to try to get out for thousands of miles, or trying to bounce your signals to talk to people across the world, perhaps. Whereas that's just not something that you would do with GMRS. 50 watts is usually plenty to get you into a repeater, but ham is clearly better. I don't think anyone would argue that GMRS is a more capable service than ham. Ham has far more capabilities. But GMRS is better when it comes to accessibility.
Well, that gets to the other advantage that I've been wanting to mention that GMRS has over ham radio, and that has to do with the restrictions on permissible speech. Now, each service has restrictions, but they're a little bit different on each one. I mean, both of the services are required to have civil, clean, above-board speech, so to speak, and that kind of goes without saying. I mean, I think everyone understands, that. Don't get on the air with hate speech and profanity and stuff that's really inappropriate, for others to hear. Because you know what? In both services, you have young ears too, as well as old ones. And some of the old ones don't appreciate it either, to be honest. Both services have rules against advertising and broadcasting transmissions or messages over the air. And scrambled messages, those that are coded with hidden meanings, are also against the rules, unless they are something like standard 10 codes or Q codes in ham radio, that sort of thing. However, GMRS definitely has an edge when it comes to the permissible speech, because unlike ham radio, which it's not something that you can go on and talk about business-related subjects. You can't. The FCC explicitly states that ham radio cannot be used for a pecuniary interest, meaning business or commercial communications over the air. That's not allowed by the FCC. However, because GMRS started off being used for business and consumer customers, and there are some businesses that have grandfathered licenses, they can still use them for business. And technically, you can still use a GMRS radio for business if everyone in the business has their own GMRS license. Also, GMRS is shared with FRS, and FRS is open to that. I mean, there are a lot of businesses, particularly small mom and pop places, that use FRS radios for business operations. And because those are shared, GMRS, yeah, you can do that. You can use GMRS for business discussions and business operations, something you can't do with ham.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I would argue that GMRS probably isn't the best service for businesses. You're probably better off with a business radio and dedicated business frequencies.
Sure.
But you're right. You do see a lot of businesses using FRS radios because FRS radios are license free, and you can just go to your local big box store and pick up a 2-pack, and they're cheap and they work as long as you don't need a lot of range. They generally get the job done, and GMRS is compatible with those. Now, FRS is probably better for business because of you don't have the license requirement. If you're using GMRS for your business, technically you are supposed to license everyone in your business, and then depending on your business size, you'd probably be just better off spending $500 on a business license.
But if it's a family business, and let's say, for instance, that let's go back to the farms, because that's still an excellent example of that. You've got a farm, you can put up a repeater for your farm, which is your business, and you can use that repeater for business purposes, talking back and forth to everyone in that family business. So I think I
would say farming
advantage.
is the most common business case for GMRS. We see that quite a bit because there's a need for higher powered mobile radios and repeaters. And you still a lot of times have just a few family members that are running the operation. So it's great for that. You're right.
Well, let's talk about who the winner is. And we're going to read the comments here in just a few moments. But my thoughts on this is ham or GMRS, that depends on who you talk to. It also depends on what you want to do with each service, what your intentions are. I don't think there is a perfect radio service out there, and there are positives and negatives to both of these services. Absolutely, as we've already discussed. And here's the thing, the costs between them are pretty much comparable. I mean, you can spend whatever you want on both ham and GMRS equipment and that sort of thing. But these services,
you can spend more on ham.
Yeah,
I'll say that. You can spend more on ham.
You can spend more on GMRS if you're so inclined. I mean, you can spend as much as you have or you want if that's if that's your inclination. But these are all different services, and they're intended for different purposes, completely different things. Each service has its strength and its limitations, and everyone who uses them doesn't need them to do the same things. So some will fit one operator better than another, and that's pretty much my thought on it. What do you think?
I think I'm going to echo that. It's absurd to try to come up with what is the better service because you're absolutely right. It depends on who you want to talk to. If I want to talk to my wife on a radio, then GMRS is 100% the better service. If I want to talk to other hams, or if I want to learn about radio and I want to talk to people around the world and experiment with radio and learn how it works and tinker with equipment, ham is 100% the better option. So it's the what's better, the fork or the spoon argument again. There's no
That's
winner.
a great analogy, actually.
They have different uses.
Yeah,
they're different things. That's
a great analogy. Are you going to eat your steak with a spoon, or are you going to eat your soup with a fork? I mean, the right tool for the right job. Once again, we get back to it.
Correct. Everyone has spoons and forks, because there's a reason to use both of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we have some thoughts on the original article that we wrote here, and I'm going to read a few. I'm going to pick a few of them. We have a lot of them, but I'm just going to pick just a few of them that I think were really, really interesting. Here's one from Speed Bump, and Speed Bump agrees with us here. Neither is better. Both offer different services, though, and that's from Speed Bump. Tom says, as a retired broadcast engineer, I've known ham radio operators for decades. In fact, many are BEs. Most live for another day just to talk shop. That's all right, I guess, but there is another world out there. GMRS, on the other hand, was intended to be a replacement for Citizens Band, in my opinion. It allows for higher transmit power than CBers craved, and who mostly broke the law by transmitting more than the 5 watts allowed. Because GMRS is limited in range due to its frequency assignment, many CB operators still prefer the 27 megahertz and illegal power to be able to get the range they're used to. GMRS has become a very useful tool for the business community. It also serves the traveling public quite well on interstate and public highways. Ham radio has been on the decline for years because teenage males are more interested in video gaming than actually learning something useful that might propel them into an engineering field and a great career. The VE field is already hurting for new blood as the old folks retire, and that's from Tom. That's an interesting statement. There's still young people getting into ham radio, but I do agree with him. I think that that it is. It's not like it used to be, I don't think. On the other hand, we have seen quite a surge in GMRS activity lately.
I think the ham people are seeing a surge as well.
Think so?
I think so, yeah. I mean, 10 years ago, we were hearing like ham is dying, and I think there's been a flood of just low price radios that makes the hobby more accessible to people. So you can, without spending a lot of money, kind of figure out if it's something that you want to get into or not.
Well, Shane says both are great for what they provide the users. GMRS is great, in my case, due to the ability to easily communicate with any family members who really don't want to deal with ham radio stuff. This makes local comms a breeze and accessible. Ham radio also has its place to overlap the localized comms and expand out regionally, interstate, internationally. Both have pros and cons, but when used together, it can be a great asset. Thumbs up to both, and that's from Shane. Now, that's an interesting take because we've seen a lot of GMRS users looking to get a ham license and studying for a ham license. And we've had, on the other hand, old hams that are looking to get a GMRS or that just go out and get a GMRS license and start using GMRS. I listen to one or two of these repeaters, these nets at night, and more I'm hearing on the GMRS, I'm hearing discussions about ham radio. These are GMRS operators, and they're having discussions about getting their ham license and studying for it and doing this and that. The thing is, you get on the ham nets, and the hams are talking about GMRS. So,
yeah, of course, really, it just makes sense that there's going to be. It just makes sense that there's going to be a lot of crossover because if you're a ham guy and you're really into radio, you're going to want a way to talk to your family on a radio, and your family's not going to take the test and get into that. So, your ham guys are going to. It makes sense that a lot of them are GMRS guys as well, and the other way as well, because if you're really into GMRS, if you've gotten it because you need to talk to someone and you find it really interesting, then GMRS is sort of a stepping stone to ham. As you learn more and more about radio, it just makes sense that you're going to want to gravitate in that direction. They complement each other.
Yeah, they do. Well, Jeffrey said...
Fork and spoon.
Well, Jeffrey says, if the SHTF, I'd rather have my ham radio. GMRS is restricted to UHF, which does not get very far, nor does it work off atmospherics. My low-band ham radio can run on a battery and can use atmospherics, otherwise known as open bands, and I could talk basically to the other side of the world if necessary, and that's from Jeffrey. Well, GMRS radios, a lot of them run on batteries too, so I think he's referring to a backup battery, I guess.
I think he's also mentioning the atmospheric, where you can bounce signals and things like that with ham, right?
Yeah, I think so. This one from Dan is interesting. It says, I'm both a ham radio operator and a GMRS radio operator. Both are great in their own environment. GMRS can certainly be used during emergency communication needs. Ham radio excels in that aspect. GMRS excels in being more family-oriented and easier to work with. That, however, comes at a cost. there's a lot more to it, but I'm just going to summarize here. So comparing GMRS with ham is comparing apples to oranges. I love both. They both taste great. Both are easily had, and both excel in the environment for which it was made for. I think that's a good one. That's from Dan. Now, I want to read this one because this one's interesting. Tony says, about the dumbest comparison I have ever seen. It misses every important point. I would only point out that while GMRS radios do enable limited person-to-person communication, ham radio is a hobby where the hobbyist has a vast array of sophisticated communication tools that enable a limitless variety forms of communication across vast distances. Why GMRS requires a license fee is a mystery given its limited capability. It certainly fails to position GMRS as a serious alternative to ham radio. It would be easy to pick apart every argument the author makes. Sorry, point game match goes to ham radio, and that's from Tony.
I'm glad we solved that.
Yeah, we solved that one. I will point out though that there's a reason why a GMRS license, we get this question a lot. There's a reason why a GMRS license doesn't require a test and a ham radio license does. And that's something we earlier that we talked about, whereas ham radio allows you to do all this tinkering on all this experimentation and things like that. Because of that, there's a lot more involved there. It can be more dangerous. It can be more risky. You can, there are things, if you don't know what you're doing, that could be, not just causing, some harmful interference, but it could be pretty dangerous for you and others around you. So that's why you need to have that license, because the FCC needs to know that if you're going to be working with this ham radio equipment, that you're going to be competent enough to do it for your safety as well as for the safety of others. I'll end it with this one because I think this one pretty much sums it up. This is from Gary. Gary says both radio services are equally abused and misused by those who just want to play G.I. Joe, Roger walkie-talkie. And that's from Gary. So with that, we'll leave it there. So I guess any other comments on ham versus GMRS?
No, I think we settled the issue. I don't think anyone's going to debate this one anymore after this episode.
I doubt it. I'm sure we'll get a whole new flurry of comments, both pro, con, and somewhere in the middle.
I don't know what more there could be to say.
All right. Well, we have some comments and questions from our blog and our forum at twayradioforum.com. The first one comes from Sean, and Sean says, my wife and I moved around 7 years ago. We found several properties/houses that were exactly what we were looking for, but they were in areas under HOA governance. That fact kept us from looking any closer to those properties. If you live in an HOA neighborhood, then you knew or should have known what you were getting into. To me, it's kind of like buying a house next to a busy airport and then complaining about the noise. I also agree with Danny that our federal government should not be involved in local issues. They don't do their job as it is, protecting our country and supporting infrastructure, so we don't need them controlling our neighborhoods. If you don't like the rules, move or work to get the rules changed at the HOA level. By the way, I don't have a problem with the antennas. Thanks for the podcast, and that's from Sean.
I like that guy.
What's that?
I like that guy. I agree with every bit of that.
And this was in response to our previous episode about ham antennas and HOAs. And we have a question from Becca. And Becca wants to know, hello, I have a Motorola T800 and I am hoping it can work with the RMU 2040. RMU 2040 is UHF business and the T800 is FRS. So my assumption is no. Is that correct? And that's from Becca.
Sorry, Becca. That is correct.
Yeah, that is correct.
Not gonna work.
No, absolutely not. All right. Well, I guess that does it for our comments and questions in this episode. Send in your comments and questions for Danny or myself to show@bytwowayradios.com. If you want to know more about today's topic or about two-way radios in general, check out our forum discussions at twowayradioforum.com. You can subscribe to the Two-Way Radio Show directly from our website at twoway.radioshow.com or hear it on Apple Podcasts, Blueberry.com, iHeartRadio, or podcastindex.org. You can also subscribe by email. Click the subscribe by email button on the Two-Way Radio Show podcast page at twoway.radioshow.com. Enter your email address and you'll get the latest episode of the Two-Way Radio Show as soon as it's released. All right, well, I guess that does it for our show in this episode. Before we go, any other final comment?
I think we covered it.
All right. Well, today's show is sponsored by BuyTwoWayRadios.com. Whether you're searching for two-way radios for general consumer or business use, Buy Two-Way Radios can help you find the best solution for your needs. Enter the promo code SHOW at checkout and save an additional 5% off your order. Give us a call at 1-800-584-1445 or enter our live chat at BuyTwoWayRadios.com. Well, everyone, as always, thanks for listening. And until next time, for the Two-Way Radio Show, I'm Rick Savoya.
And I'm Danny Feemster.
And we're out.